In this clip, we'll learn how to finish up painting textures for our character's hair. Alright, great. So in the last clip, we added in some variation to the base color using the ambient occlusion mask right here in variation 1. Now in this clip, let's go ahead and tackle this variation 2 layer that has a black mask on it. Now if I shift click on this mask, you can see the color that I've chosen, and I would like to begin to blend this in sort of a striated hair-like way. Let me show you what I mean. Let's go ahead and shift click on the layer again, and we'll just jump in here. And let's just shrink our brush down just like so, and I'll tap the X key so we switch to a white color here. And we could come in here and begin to paint strokes, sort of like that. Now this is probably not the easiest way, painting each individual hair strand. And it's probably not going to look the best either. Let me go ahead and just grab my eraser and we'll just erase those strokes here inside of our mask. I'll tap the 1 key to go back to my paintbrush, and I want to point out the areas I'm going to target. Now we've added in some darker values in the recessed areas. I want to add this variation in the areas that protrude, kind of the areas between these crevices that have been highlighted with dark value. The light values will go in these areas here. So let me just undo that with Control Z. And let's jump over and customize our brush a bit. The first thing that I would probably look to change here is the alpha. You can see that in mousing over this, it's just simply the default soft circle that can be hardened up and painted with. Now we have a tremendous amount of alphas over here inside of our shelf. You can see here, if I grab the alpha category, there are a large number of these here. Now you can also get to these right over here by simply tapping the alpha. And you can see here that Substance is already looking in the alphas category. And we have access to the exact same alphas right over here. So we can choose one there, we can grab one in here, and we can drag it over. Now I'm going to choose a very specific alpha that I think we can tailor to look like hair. Let's come in and find, where is that alpha? Here we go. Drop Splatter. This one here. Let me just mouse over it so you can see what the preview of this alpha looks like. Now this alpha could easily be used to paint hair. So let's grab it and drop it into our alpha slot in the properties panel. Great. You can see the preview right up here. And if I make my brush larger here, you can actually see the alpha inside the brush reticle. And we could come in here and begin to paint. Now you can see the default behavior here doesn't really look too much like hair. So let's begin to start customizing this a bit. And I'll just come back over here inside my properties. And let's go ahead and set the size. And we're going to make that pressure sensitive if yours is not currently already pressure sensitive. And again, you can do that with this little thing here and selecting the teardrop icon. So if we make that pressure sensitive, we might think about making the flow pressure sensitive as well. Now you can see that opacity does not have a pressure sensitivity option here, and that's okay. We aren't going to necessarily need it. But the spacing is potentially a problem. Now spacing is going to control how tightly these alphas are together that follow my stroke before they get projected. So when we have a spacing value that's very high, these alphas get spread out more. When it's very low, the alphas are very close together. And you can see here when they're very close together, it almost starts to look strand-like. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump back over here and see what else we might adjust. I'll probably adjust the follow path option. You can see by doing that, the alpha will be aligned with the path perfectly. So when I start to turn corners, the alpha will rotate. And if we come down here and look a little bit more, I think for the remainder of these, we should be okay. Really, it's the opacity and the size that we need to tailor from here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to paint a few strokes. Let's maybe pick on this area here. Now, I'm not going to paint the entirety of his hair inside this clip. I'm going to paint a small area, but I'm going to repeat that process pretty much everywhere. So if you have a very steady hand, you could come in here and begin to slowly paint. And in looking at that, I'm not super happy with the look of that just yet. I might come over here and let's turn the pressure sensitivity for the size off. And I'll undo that. Okay, that's probably a little better. And maybe we come over here and we reduce the opacity a bit and the size. There we go. Okay, now we're in business. So we can start to just fine tune this stroke here. I'm wanting something that looks a little bit more feathered. I might even reduce the flow a little bit as well. Okay, that's starting to look really nice. Okay, so if you have a very steady hand, you could begin to come in here and paint. And again, we're painting white into our mask. And then if you get paint in an area you don't want it in, you can always just tap the X key and begin to paint it out with a value of black. Just like so. So essentially what we're doing here is we're creating another level of variation in the way the colors are stacking inside of our layers palette, or our layers panel rather. Now, if you don't have a very steady hand or you're having some issues, maybe this is your first time using a tablet or you just aren't real comfortable painting with it yet, then there is a really valuable tool. And this is a tool that I use quite a lot. I rather like it. It's called a lazy mouse. And it's this feature right up here. You can mouse over that and you see it says lazy mouse. Now, if you enable this option, the reticle is going to change just a little bit. And I'm going to come down here and show you. So if I start to paint now, you'll see here that the stroke is following just a little bit behind my reticle or my cursor. Let's just ramp this up some. And if I start to paint again, you can see how delayed that is. So this is a very unique feel that's actually been around in several different applications for a while now. As a matter of fact, ZBrush has had this feature as long as I can remember, and even Photoshop has recently introduced a similar feature. So in my opinion, the easiest way to describe this is if you imagine that there is a string that is tied to your stylus, and the other end of that string is tied to whatever's applying the paint. You basically can imagine just drawing and dragging the string, and it's sort of dragging the paint behind it. So you can come in here, and because of this, you can create really steady, smooth lines. Now you may need to adjust this parameter right here to control exactly how delayed it is, but you can get some really nice strokes using this lazy mouse feature. Now again, this is a technique that if you choose to use it, you just tap this little button right here and you can enable that. But for this hair right here, really what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend a little bit of time just sort of feathering it and keeping in mind the directionality that's already been established with the sculpted detail that's being communicated in our normal map. And you can see here, I'm still looking at my base color. Let's go ahead and tap the M key and take a look at what that's starting to look like through the material. You can see right now this layer and the roughness may not quite be right, so we can come over here and we can make this a bit more rough. And you can start to see exactly how that color is appearing. Now, once you get a good section of this painted and you're starting to feel the technique that you're using, what I would recommend doing is coming back over here and adjusting your colors a little bit. Because again, remember, this is the strength of using these fill layers, is we have the power to adjust colors whenever we choose to in a non-destructive manner. So I would go ahead and continue with this technique, paint in some of these hair strands in this variation. Don't completely overwhelm the other colors that we're using. Use these sparingly, but to highlight some of the raised up areas. And in the next module, what we're going to do is we're going to move forward with painting our textures, and we're going to begin working on all the clothing and the armor that our character is wearing. All right, great. Let's go ahead and just review what we've covered in this module. First, we've learned how Substance Painter's material system works, using both channels and maps that we've baked. Next, we learned how to break up a texture set into areas that need to be textured using groups and masks. Next, we learned how to use multiple layers together to create the finished look for a specific detail that we're texturing. We learned how fill layers and layer masks allow us to work non-destructively. And lastly, we learned how to customize the paintbrush using an alpha to get a desired look. Now, I'm going to go ahead and challenge you at this point. If you're working on the exact same asset I am, or if you're working on a different one, go ahead and choose the first and really simplest texture set for your game character, preferably something like the hair. Break down the objects into fill layers that together will create the look you're after. Paint the appropriate masks and apply those colors. If you'd like to get some feedback on your work, feel free to post your work up on Unity Connect and check in with your peers.